He's gonna have to fight! Bang! Pressure's coming! Dumped! Hogtied! When you've given everything, what will the record books say about you, Matthew?
Hello and welcome back for Season 2, Episode 33 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Last week, we kicked off with a couple of former NBA G League players committing to play college basketball and further breaking our brains on the ideas of eligibility and amateurism. Then I predicted the 2025 World Series, taking the Dodgers' billion-dollar super team over the scrappier, more upstart Blue Jays. It was a dense one last week, now that I think about it and say it. Other things on last week's agenda: predicting the Thursday night football game between the Chargers and Vikings, and finally, a handful of takeaways from the opening games of the NBA season. I think that was it. A majority of this week is going to be Fantasy Football Friday, starting with my Midseason Awards. It may sound a little bit similar to the way too early NFL awards, but this is strictly fantasy football, and like always, I like to just focus on PPR or point per reception formats. I recognize other scoring formats have different considerations and maybe different rankings, but I still always default to full PPR because it's the only format that I've played in full transparency. We'll follow a lot of the same conventions as the NFL Honors typically does. It makes all the sense in the world then to give out some of the same awards that they do. My MVP, Most Valuable Player. It really was going to be Puka Nacua before he got injured, I think, because it looked like he was going to have zero challenges for wide receiver one, especially with the kind of volume that he was soaking up. Now, however, the choice is obvious, and this guy keeps smacking us in the face with his numbers every week. He leads the league in all the Triple Crown rushing categories, and he's on the best team in the league. Of course, it's the Colts RB1, Jonathan Taylor. He's always been good enough to do something like this. He's been athletically gifted enough, smart enough, tough enough. He just hasn't had a lot of help typically on Indy's offense. Now the Colts have brought, apparently for some reason, the best quarterback addition in the league in, Daniel Jones, and he's gotten them in all the right looks, and he's taken some of the rushing load off of JT when necessary, and Taylor's numbers for that reason look MVP-like. A few of the things he leads the NFL in so far: 143 carries, 853 rushing yards through 8 weeks, 12 rushing touchdowns through 8 weeks, 14 total touchdowns, 1,056 scrimmage yards, 4 100-yard games. That's tied with James Cook of the Bills, 20-plus yard rushes with 6, 0 fumbles, and of course that all adds up to fantasy RB1. He scored 2.5 more points per week than Christian McCaffrey, who might go over 1,000 yards rushing and receiving. Again, enough said. Jonathan Taylor also finished as RB1 in 2021, and we thought Saquon last year was insane. He could end up blowing that stat profile away and go well beyond 2,000 yards. If you have JT on your team, congrats. You win just about every single week when he drops a 30 bomb. Let's do a Defense of the Year since we can't really do Defensive Player of the Year. I know there's IDP or individual defensive player scoring, but again, I've never played in a league that does that, so I don't want to try and figure it out on the fly. If I had to, I would probably go with either the Jaguars' Devin Lloyd, who was my way too early Defensive Player of the Year pick, or Myles Garrett, just because Myles had that 5-sack game on Sunday. That was the Browns' single-game franchise record. Anyway, this will be the award given to the best, most valuable, most automatic fantasy defense and special teams unit. I wanted to say the Denver Broncos, but then I heard that they're going to be without their top corner and reigning Defensive Player of the Year Pat Surtain for a couple weeks-ish with a pec injury. It doesn't sound like he's going to go on IR, but that still is going to make a dent in their defense. The Broncos have a ton of good players without Surtain at all 3 levels, but that's still going to push me into taking the Houston Texans as my Defense of the Year so far. Remember, this was the unit that I chose as my number 1 preseason option, too. They're tied for second in points per game among defense and special teams units, somehow tied with the Seahawks. Shout out to Seattle. But the top unit right now is the New England Patriots, which is even more nuts. I fear that New England's win streak is going to come crashing to the ground. It's at 5 right now, which is very surprising. But wow, the Patriots also look good in all 3 phases. Houston is the most talented, though, of these defenses on paper. Some of the numbers don't actually jump off the page at you. They have 8 interceptions or 1 per week, 3 fumble recoveries, 16 sacks. none of which is super elite, but they've excelled as a scoring and total yardage defense, if you follow me. They've allowed the second fewest total touchdowns with only 13. I struggle to believe that the Rams defense has only given up 11 touchdowns on the entire season, but I know it to be true. Houston is allowing 267 total yards a game, split with about 179 passing and 88 rushing. Those are great, but the most impressive number is probably the 14.7 points a game to lead the league. That's less than half of what the Cowboys, Ravens, and Bengals are giving up right now. Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter is probably my favorite edge rushing duo right now. Jalen Petre, their top safety, he's the number one player at his position by Pro Football Focus. Kamari Lassiter is having a great breakout year as their number 2 corner. And just like Denver, they're good at every level and it shows up in the numbers. I trust the Houston Texans over any other unit in the league down the stretch, and you should too. They're my fantasy defense of the first half and will likely be the defense of the year. Same thing coming for kicker. I just had an awesome thought, actually. The league should really have a specialist of the year. It's so conspicuous when a team has a big issue at kicker or punter or long snapper, holder, any of those things, so I'm not sure why this doesn't exist yet. Then again, there are fewer options to choose from, and offensive line, which is objectively crazy important, just got their own award for this year. I'd like to see this specialist of the year thing eventually. Well, the kicker conversation is going to be very short. The Cowboys' Brandon Aubrey has probably the best leg that the league has ever seen. He's K1 in fantasy. He's also scored the most points in the league in real life and has not missed a single field goal try in 16 of them through 8 weeks. The only other kickers in the conversation are the Steelers' Chris Boswell and quietly the Texans' Kaimi Fairbairn. Fairbairn, of course, because the Texans' offense is a shell of its former self and can't score any touchdowns. Boswell, of course, because he's a fantastic bad weather kicker. He's been kicking at home in Pittsburgh for over a decade and is, I'd say, the best bad weather kicker of all time, maybe even over Adam Vinatieri. Boswell, Aubrey, Fairbairn are K1, 2, and 3 by fantasy points per game in that order. Someone else could get hot, but Aubrey's average numbers are better than the best stretches of most Hall of Fame kickers ever. He's my top fantasy kicker of the first half. Comeback player of the year is zero contest to me. It's Christian McCaffrey. If it weren't for Jonathan Taylor, McCaffrey would have a good chance at fantasy MVP at least. He's RB2 in PPR formats. He's second in the league in carries with 140. That's only 3 behind JT. And the only big surprise in his numbers is that he's only turned those into 490 rushing yards in 8 games. That's 3.5 yards a carry with a long of 15 on the whole year. Now, that's not all a reflection of how well he's played, because the Niners' offensive line really hasn't played up to their standard, especially run-blocking-wise. As a receiving running back, hello, that's what he does. He is sort of synonymous with that. He is the best and has been the best and will continue to be the best. 56 catches for 559 yards. That would be a fantastic number for most teams' number 1 receiver. What a monster comeback it's been for him, and he reminds us every single healthy year that the injuries from the previous year or years didn't slow him down. Fantasy owners rejoice. McCaffrey should finish as a top 5 running back on the back of pure volume, as he's even handling over 9 targets a game. For my comeback player of the year runner-up, I like Dak in fantasy, and I recognize how good he's been on the field, but he always puts up numbers when he's healthy. Sometimes those numbers also include interceptions, right? Like throwing 8 picks in 8 games last year. But when the Cowboys play shootouts, they have a good chance to win, period, ever since the moment he was drafted. And with as laughable as their defense has performed this year, he's had to put up those numbers. The only reason it would be considered a comeback is his injury, but I'd rather give this to the guy who missed almost 14 games than the guy who missed half a season. If Prescott does end up with MVP-level numbers, which is a solid possibility, then he'll start swaying my vote a bit more. And those are my first half awards so far for fantasy football. If I think of a few more, I'll drop them in, but we are heading into week 9 of the season, so we're right about halfway through. That's all for our Fantasy Football Friday for now. And after I check in on the Thursday Night Football picks I made last week, we'll predict the toilet bowl of a Thursday Night Football game for week 9. I took the Chargers over the Vikings by 10 last week, and they just blew that away and blew Minnesota away 37-10. Carson Wentz, He was being held together by tape and prayers. He was this sacrificial lamb in the pocket, and he went for way under 200 yards passing, which I had predicted. How about 144? The Vikings could never consistently even try to run the ball because they were down by so much. Even though their top RB, Aaron Jones, came back from injury, they only rushed 11 times for 34 yards. Minnesota's leading rusher was Xavier Scott, who I've literally never heard of. Sorry. Justin Herbert did not have standout yardage, but he didn't have to because Kamani Vidal is really taking over their RB1 spot. And because it's a Jim Harbaugh coach team, he's going to get a ton of carries going forward. I'm really happy to have snagged Vidal on waivers in one of my fantasy leagues. I predicted 325-plus yards for Herbert. He only had to throw for 227. So the game script explains just about all the variants, and those were my picks from the Thursday night game last week. It's going to be J.J. McCarthy time for the Vikings again. He's supposed to be ready to play on Sunday against the Lions. Boy, good luck to him. Now this is Thursday, October 30th as I record, and the Dolphins and Ravens have combined for a 4-11 record coming in. They're two teams that couldn't be further away from where they should be, even if the Dolphins weren't expected to be a powerhouse or a Super Bowl contender. Baltimore, though, they could fairly be called the most disappointing team in the league so far, because people still feel like they should hang with the Bills and the Chiefs in the AFC every year, and they often just don't. So how have they gotten here? Miami blew out the Falcons last week. That's a team that really can't do anything on offense, no matter if it's Kirk Cousins or Michael Penix at quarterback. Baltimore lost Lamar Jackson for 3 weeks to a hamstring injury, and they went 1-2 without him. They had two pitiful showings. They lost 44-10 to the Texans. Again, Texans' defense is fantastic. But then 17-3 to the Rams. That's a tough gauntlet to run through. And then finally, they beat the Bears 30-16 last week. Now, Lamar is going to play on Thursday against the Dolphins, but will he be limited at all in the run game or even moving around in the pocket? That's always the question with him when he gets banged up, and the answer always seems to be no. I wish Tua would have never told a whole press conference that he can't see over his offensive line. Did you guys see that clip? If not, I'll leave a link to it. That was a fascinating PR move. But I have to say, Tua is learning to survive without Tyreek Hill. It's a really tough situation that he's in. And Miami also got a couple of good weeks out of unretired tight end Darren Waller, but then he had to go on injured reserve with a pec strain before last week's game. Now, surviving is a relative term because Tua has thrown the most interceptions in the league with 10. Unfortunately, I do think he's going to throw 2 more interceptions on Thursday. That's my first prediction. If you saw that apparent pink eye or something that he had during the game on Sunday, and you heard him talk again about not being able to see over the line, then this sort of feels like a lock. He was very good in the Atlanta game, with 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, but then the 2 weeks before that, he threw 3 interceptions each. I also foresee another one of those Derrick Henry games coming, if Lamar runs a little bit less than normal. Lamar's rushing threat is, well, the best rushing threat the league's ever seen on a per-carry basis, and I'm tempted to say at this point that Derrick Henry is maybe the greatest rushing threat overall, as measured by, how much total damage he's done and punishment he's inflicted on people. I'd qualify a true Derrick Henry game as 150-plus yards from scrimmage, most of that rushing, and at least 2 rushing touchdowns. The line on the game sits at Ravens minus 7.5, and I do think that Baltimore wins tonight, but I expect Miami to cover. A 1-score game on a Thursday night always seems like an appealing bet if you're into that kind of thing. I'm calling it 24-20 Ravens, so go ahead and take the Dolphins plus 7.5. I will have a ton more to say about the World Series when it wraps up, but I do want to do it justice and make it the bulk of or even an entire episode next week. I will have to whittle it down and focus on another one of those Ohtani games today that no one else has ever had, could ever, will ever have. It was Game 3 of the series in LA, and it was as comical, absurd, and nonsensical of a ball game as the sport has ever seen. I'm not a fantastic historian, but I have done a data journalism project on MVP stats, so I sort of understand what great, rare, and impossible stat benchmarks are. 9 times reaching base in a single game is something I would have said is utterly unattainable with the way baseball is played now in 2025. But what did Shohei Ohtani go and do in that Game 3? His very first at-bat off Max Scherzer was a missile pulled into the right field corner for a double. That's basically a best-case scenario sometimes when he's swinging it at his absolute peak. Second at bat, 95-mile-an-hour fastball in on his hands a little bit, and he turns on it, short solo home run down the right field line. Third at bat, Scherzer must have been relieved to be out of the game by that point, as their reliever Mason Fluharty gives up an RBI double to left center for Ohtani. Fourth at bat, dead center fastball at 98 from Seranthony Dominguez on the first pitch. Another home run. That's kind of a mistake pitch. This time to left center field and deeper, and it tied the game 5-5 to eventually put it into extras. You've probably heard by now, the game went to 18 innings, tying the longest World Series game of all time by innings and ending up second all time by duration at 6 hours and 39 minutes. Full disclosure, I was physically unable to stay awake that long, but I did make it through the first 12 innings. Anyway, it gets much easier to describe from here on out the Ohtani game because he received Barry Bonds treatment. 4 consecutive intentional walks, and only 1 normal walk in the bottom of the 17th. It was more effective, and it gave them a better chance to win, putting Shohei on first base every single at-bat, even with future Hall of Famers Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman behind him, than it was pitching to him, even once. And if you didn't hear how this story ends, Freddie Freeman himself did walk it off with a home run to lead off the 18th inning. It made him the only player all time with multiple walk-off home runs in the World Series. I mentioned when predicting the MVP that I thought Freddie's magic from last year's World Series MVP run would run out, and I was wrong again. And by the way, the previous record for times on base in a World Series game was 6. Ohtani had 9. So if you're keeping the running tally, the best Ohtani games of all time are a 6-for-6 game with 3 home runs, 10 RBIs, and 2 stolen bases last year in September against the Marlins. The classic hit 3 home runs, strike out 10, give up no runs in 6 innings pitched outing from Game 4 of the NLCS against the Brewers. And this one, 4-for-4, 2 home runs, 2 doubles, 3 runs scored, 3 RBIs, and 5 walks, with 4 of the 5 being intentional, for 9 times on base. There's only so many words to describe what we've seen him do. Only so many superlatives and praises, and I'm actually pretty good at finding or creating them, but I'm mostly out of them. Ohtani is going to get a lot more traction as the greatest player that's ever lived after this year, even if Toronto does hold on to the 3-2 series lead. Now remember the chatter toward the end of the regular season that he could be used out of the bullpen? That sounds like it might end up a reality too, as LA might only have 27 outs left in their season and have to pull out all the stops. I wonder if he'll get serious consideration for Series MVP even if LA loses. It's so rare throughout the history of sports, right? But so is everything else that he's done since the moment he touched a baseball field. I really wouldn't mind it. Unfortunately, it does look like the Dodgers' other pitchers might do them in, but I'd be willing to say that he deserves it no matter what the rest of the series brings. And that's about it for episode 33. I have another powerlifting meet on the mic next weekend. I'll drop you a link for that one in the description. I'm back working in the federation that I compete in for this one. It's Powerlifting America's West Michigan Classic in Grand Rapids. Should be a fun time, and a really unique challenge that I'm taking on is simultaneously doing the PA announcing. I still haven't figured out if it's just going to be my stream audio pumped over the gym speakers or if I'm going to use a separate PA mic and have to learn how to speak into both that and the headset mic. I don't know. It's fun and unique regardless. And I'm still gearing up and prepping for the USAPL Michigan State Championships. Those are going to be the 22nd and 23rd of November. That's a big production with replays and cool graphics and talkback channels and a bunch of other fun features. Thanks for coming back week after week, folks. Or if you're relatively new here, we're so happy to have you. Either way, check out all my socials, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, @The Voice of Tanner, X, just Voice of Tanner, and YouTube is the whole thing spelled out with spaces. Connect on LinkedIn if you're a real one, leave a like, comment, and share. I'll catch you next week. This has been Season 2, Episode 33 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Thanks for joining me.
He's gonna have to fight! Bang! Pressure's coming! Dumped! Hogtied! When you've given everything, what will the record books say about you, Matt?